Prithvi Shantirantariksha Shantir Dyav Shantir Disha Shantiravantara Disha Shantiragni Shantir Vayu Shantiraditya Shantish Chandrama Shantir Nakshatrani Shantirapa Shantiroshadaya Shantir Vanaspataya Shantir Gau Shantiraja Shantirashva Shantir Purusha Shantir Brahma Shantir Brahmana Shantir Shantireva Shanti Shantir Me Astu Shantihi. May there be peace on earth and in the sky. May there be peace in the water and in all directions. May there be peace in the plants, in the trees, and in animals. May there be peace in the hearts of all beings. May there be peace in everyone and in everything. Sarvetra sukhinas santu, sarve santu niramayaha, sarve bhadrani pashyantu, ma kaschit dukkha bhag bhavet, sarvastaratu durgani, sarvo bhadrani pashyatu, sarvas sadbuddhimapnotu, sarvas sarvatra nandatu. May all be happy and healthy. May all see what is good, and may no one experience misery. May all overcome their obstacles and acquire good tendencies. May people everywhere find joy and fulfillment. Let us now spend some time touching the center of peace and joy in our hearts. A good way to begin the practice is to withdraw the scattered energies of the mind and bring them to rest on one point. That point can be our own breathing. Let us therefore practice breathing with awareness. As we breathe in, let us visualize that our body and mind are being filled with love, strength, and compassion. And as we breathe out, let us release all the stress, anxiety, and exhaustion in the body and mind. Let us practice this way for a while. Let us now turn our attention to the region of our heart. Although God is present everywhere and in everyone, the divine presence can be felt most clearly in our own hearts. We can meditate in any way we have been taught. To remain focused, we can take the help of a short mental prayer or a mantra or a divine name. Let us now spend some time dwelling on the presence of God in our hearts. Om Asato Ma Satgamaya Tamaso Ma Jyotirgamaya Mrityorma Amritam Gamaya Aviravirmageti Rudrayatte Takshinam Mukham Tenamam Pahi Nityam. May the Divine lead us from the unreal to the real, from darkness to light, from death to immortality. May the Divine Consciousness fill our hearts and protect us. We begin today on verse number 145. We saw at the beginning that the student asked a number of questions to the teacher, and in the course of his explanation, he is answering those questions one by one. So these two verses that we will see today, they are in answer to the question he had asked. That was in verse 49. How does the bondage exist? In other words, where is this bondage rooted? So let's look at verse 45. Bijam samsruti bhumi jasya tutamo dehatmadhirankuro ragav pallavam karma tu vapuf skandho savakshakhikaha Agranindriya samhatischa vishaya pushpani dukkham phalam nana karma samudbhavam bahuvidham bhoktatra jiva khagaha. A very beautiful imagery is presented here. The tree of samsara has ignorance as its seed. Its sprout is the awareness of the body as I. Attachment, its tender leaves, karma, its water, body, its trunk, the prana, its branches, the senses, its twigs, and the sense objects, its flowers. Its fruits are different kinds of misery resulting from diverse karmas, feasting on which is the embodied self, jiva, as the bird. So a very elaborate imagery. The tree of samsara, the relative existence, this whole world that we are experiencing, is often described in the Gita, in the Upanishads, and the image often is given of a tree, something that is always growing. We know that when we plant a seed, then it sprouts, it's a tiny little plant, and gradually, eventually grows up into a huge tree. In the same way, the samsara starts with this simple seed of ignorance. And then one by one you can see the first thing that appears, the first sprout, is the awareness of the body as I. And we have seen this, how the infinite Brahman, this one infinite reality. The seed of ignorance means the often imagery we provide is that of a sleep, because sleep is a form of ignorance. In other words, when I become ignorant of my waking identity of this world, that is when sleep happens. And so therefore, it's as if that one infinite reality went to sleep. And when Brahman goes to sleep, Brahman forgets I am Brahman, just like we forget who we are. And the first sprout, the first way the ignorance manifests is this infinite Brahman getting identified with this tiny body as I. That's why the sprout is the awareness of the body as I. And once we become identified with the body, then attachment is a natural result. Everything that is favorable to the body, we get attached to it. Everything that is not favorable, we automatically get detached from it. So attachment, it's tender leaves. Karma, it's water. Because we know we need water for the growth of any plant, any tree. And it's karma that feeds this tree. We have also seen how we cannot stop karma. As long as we have this I attached to the body and mind, we cannot stop karma. Because by nature, the body and mind, being part of this material world, they are active. They cannot be still. And because we are identified with the body and mind, we continuously do karma. And if we do karma, we also then experience the results of karma. So karma, it's water. Body, it's trunk, the main trunk of the tree. Prana are the different branches. The senses, it's twigs. It's interesting, the distinction made between branches and twigs. I mean, branches are relative. The trunk is the thickest part of the tree from which branches emerge. And from those branches, the small, tiny twigs come. The twigs are dependent on the branches. The branch is dependent on the body, on the trunk. In the Upanishads, there are several places they point out how, in fact, there are some interesting stories in the Upanishads, how the different senses are rooted or are dependent on prana. In fact, one of the Upanishads describes a kind of struggle for supremacy, a struggle to be the most important entity. So just as you might find something happening in the workplace, where if there is the workplace politics, in short, there's people wanting to climb the ladder and wanting to be at the top. So something similar is imagined with regard to the different senses in the body. So there are the senses, there is the prana, all of these, and it's kind of a workplace inside. And they are all fighting among themselves for supremacy. And so the story goes to say the eyes said, we are the chief, we are the most important person here. And of course, none of the other senses agreed with that assessment. And so then they decided among themselves, okay, let's see. Whoever is the most important one, that means everyone else is dependent on you. Everyone else cannot live without you. So you just kind of leave for a short while, take a leave of absence, and let's see if the rest of us can survive. So then these eyes, but again, eyes don't mean simply this. It's the sense of vision. That's the idea. So the sense of vision, the eyes, withdraw. And, well, there is a little bit of a handicap, but the rest of the body just goes on just fine. And so then the eyes return and say, okay, I think we're probably not as great as we thought we were. And then one by one, the other senses withdraw. The ear, the sense of smell, the sense of touch. And the body seems to go on just fine. And then finally, it's the turn of prana, the vital force, the life force. And prana said, okay, let me step out a little bit. And as soon as prana steps out a little bit, all the others say, no, 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 please don't go. If you go, we can't survive. And that's how then prana is kind of establishes its supremacy over all the senses. And that's how you find it here. The prana are the branches and the senses are the twigs which come out of the branches and are dependent on the branches. The sense objects are the flowers. Oftentimes the flowers are very beautiful, very attractive, and that's how we get attracted to these sense objects. Its fruits are different kinds of misery resulting from diverse karmas. Now, to be fair, the results of karma are both joy and sorrow. But here he just mentioned its fruits are just misery. What is meant is that a superficial look at the results of karma might seem as if there is joy and sorrow. Favorable actions or success yields to happiness, unfavorable results or failure in some form leads to sorrow. So joy and sorrow is what we experience in daily life. But that's not what is meant here. What they say is different kinds of misery. What it means is that if we look deeply at whatever experiences we have, we might see something different. And that's pretty much true with everything. A superficial look gives us one view. A deeper look, a careful look might give us a different picture. And what is pointed out here is the primary results of karma are the experience of aging, sickness, death, which are universal. No one is exempt from it. So oftentimes when we speak about joy and sorrow, we can divide that experience at two levels. One we can say is a temporal joy and sorrow. A joy and sorrow that seems to come and go. A joy and sorrow that not everyone in the world has it. For instance, the joy of winning a lottery. And that's a real joy. But among the millions who buy the lottery ticket, one or two or a handful of them get that joy. Not everyone wins the lottery every time you buy a ticket. Similarly, sorrow. The sorrow or suffering caused by homelessness, by hunger, is a very real suffering. But not every person is homeless. Not every person remains hungry. So this temporal form of joy and sorrow is experienced by all, but not universally by everyone. Also, this joy and sorrow is produced by these material things here in the world and can also be changed. For instance, poverty, for instance. There have been some places in the world by some intelligent socio-economic reforms, one can do a lot to lift people out of poverty. So there are not permanent solutions for poverty, but clearly, at least in some pockets of the world, it's possible to have some remedial measures. So this is with regard to the temporal joy and sorrow. But underlying the temporal joy and sorrow is what we might call the existential joy and sorrow. I'm using the word existential in the sense the joy and sorrow that is inseparably connected with our existence as human beings. And what we discover is that there are certain things that no living being is free from. And that is, the Gita also refers to it in one verse, Janma mrityu chara vyadhi dukkha dosha anudarshanam. What it means is birth, death, aging, illness. These are things every living creature has to face. And these things produce suffering. So this is truly universal. Even when we experience joy, think about, let's take a concrete example. Let's say that your heart is pining to get some object. You're so, you just want it. And unless there is some intense desire in the heart to get something, until we have got it, we are not fully at rest. So there is suffering before we get the desired thing. And then let's say somehow we manage to get the desired thing and there is this great joy. But then after some time, that joy doesn't remain all the time. After you have got the thing, then after a day or two, it just remains. It's like you want to get you want to watch a new movie and you're like eager to see it. And after you've seen the movie, of course you're happy, but then there's nothing much to be done after that. Sometimes, like if you have got something very valuable you wanted and you got it, and after getting it you are very happy, but sometimes it creates other anxieties. Oh, what if now this thing is stolen? I need to preserve it. Or what if you have bought let's say a big house, then that has its own problem. What now if the stock market crashes, then its values go down and it may not have any resale value. So everything that can bring us joy in the world can also potentially has factors which can produce suffering afterwards. So what they say is that before we get this joy, there is suffering in the anxiety of acquiring something, and afterward there is suffering. Only in between, there is this little bit of joy. There is one verse in Sanskrit. It says, Adau ante chayan nasti madhya kalepi tat tatha, which simply means that which is not there in the beginning and not there in the end is probably not there in the middle also. For instance, the dream world. Why is it that we dismiss the dream as all just a dream and don't give much value to it? Because the dream world didn't exist before I went to sleep. The dream world doesn't exist after I wake up. Only in the interim period, it seems to have some kind of an existence. So it wasn't there in the beginning, it's not there in the end, so it probably wasn't truly, really there in the middle as well. So that's how they speak about the joy we get in the world. Before that joy, there was suffering. So beginning there was suffering, afterward there is suffering. So in between, this joy in the middle was probably just it's only an appearance. Anyway, that's the kind of an explanation sometimes they give to not get deluded by this appearance of joy in the world. And that's why when the Buddha speaks about life is suffering, Buddha did not say life is joy and suffering, just said suffering. Similarly, Krishna in the Gita, in fact, two places in the Gita, Krishna refers to the world as anityam asukham lokam, having come to this world which is anitya, which is temporary, transient, and asukham, sukha is joy, asukha means joyless. So again, Krishna refers to our present experience as joyless. In another place in the Gita, he refers to this world as dukkhalayam, as an abode of misery. Now, these seem to be extremely negative descriptions of the world. And we can understand that they would make sense only if we recognize that what they are really saying is that the feeling of joy is something that fools us in this world. If we look deeply, we might find just sorrow. And that's why here you find its fruits are just different kinds of misery. A part of this also means that when we look deeply and find that everything that comes from perishable things in the world is just misery. Misery is misery, and the joy we seem to get in the world is also a misery in a different form. Now that's the experience of someone in whose heart a great amount of detachment has arisen. Now we might say, well, then life would be so pointless. Just to say, just misery. Then what is there to look forward to? And that's the whole point. Once I know that this is just an abode of misery, then my mind would say, is there any other place? Is there any other way by which I can be free from this? It's only then I would strive to find a way out of this. That's what made the Buddha go out in search of the solution to this problem. So we will have a greater motivation, a greater, motivation is the word, an intense motivation to seek God, to seek the higher reality, only when we know that what and where we are now is not worth all the trouble that we seem to take. And that's why he says the fruits are different kinds of misery resulting from diverse karmas, feasting on which is the embodied self as the bird. Now the bird, the jiva, the individual self as the bird, this imagery also comes often in the Upanishads. You might remember that imagery of the two birds. There is this one bird who's sitting on the tree, pecking at the different fruits. And when the fruit is sweet, the bird is very happy. And it pecks at another one, and that turns out to be an exceptionally bitter fruit. And then the great kind of a detachment comes over that bird and says, oh no, these are extremely bitter fruits. I don't want them. And then the bird says, okay, let me just go to a higher branch and see. So he goes up. When he's going up, he looks up and finds another bird at the top of the tree. And that bird is exactly identical like this bird, except that that bird at the top of the tree seems shining. It's just sitting there peacefully, not looking for any fruits, just in bliss, and his body is just shining, effulgent. It's full of effulgence. And so this lower bird says, wow, I want to go there. And then kind of hops onto a higher branch. But when he hops onto a higher branch, we find there are some more fruits there. So once again, this bird gets distracted and starts pecking at those fruits. Maybe he finds one or two sweet ones and says, this is wonderful. I've come to a great place. And then maybe he pecks at another one which is very bitter. Again, a kind of detachment comes. Again, he looks up and says, oh, that's the bird. That's where I wanted to go. Then again hops up. So in this way, this bird, how often this bird forgets the higher goal, distracted by these fruits around. But slowly, with these kind of repeated experiences of detachment, over time, this bird keeps on hopping from one branch to higher, one branch to the higher, ultimately goes so close to that upper bird and discovers that light coming from that upper bird starts falling on this lower bird, and this lower bird seems to just kind of melt into it, and then makes an amazing discovery that there was always only one bird. That bird which was sitting above was the only bird that ever existed. Somehow that bird had mistakenly thought that I am here below tasting all the fruits and flowers. So this is the imagery found in the Mundaka Upanishad and other places as well. And that's why this imagery of the self, the jiva, as a bird. And it's a story of our life. Even when we are inspired by a higher ideal, that's where we want to go. That's what we want to achieve. But we know that there are some compulsions, we're kind of tied with the strings. And those strings could be the duties, the responsibilities that we have, the commitments that we have. So sometimes we feel, oh yeah, and then sometimes you might feel, oh, I would like to spend all my time meditating, reading, studying, but what to do? I've got this thing to attend to, these are the things. And so our hands and feet are tied, as it were. But then we remember that ideal, and then in spite of these things that are holding us down, we try our best to go to that upper bird. But every now and then, we seem to get stuck by these different fruits around us, getting distracted. And then we have a way of justifying our distractions, our forgetfulness. But in many other ways, we just try to say, I would like to do this, but I can't. But a sincere seeker is one. Not that we may not always fail. We do. We may forget. But if we have that higher goal, higher ideal somewhere in the corner of our heart, then even though in fits and starts, we'll see, we make some progress, then we get distracted for a while, then we make some progress again. But gradually, in steps, sometimes slowly, sometimes speedily, we are approaching that higher bird. And that's why this imagery of the bird is important. So look at verse 146. Ajnanamulo ayam anatma bandho naisargiko anadirananta iritaha janma pyaya vyati jaradi dukkha pravaha patam janayatyamushya. Rooted in ignorance, this binding identification with what is not the real self is said to be natural, without beginning and without end. It generates the flow of misery caused by factors such as birth, death, disease, and old age. So this is what I referred to earlier, the primary causes of existential suffering. Suffering inseparably attached to our human identity. As long as we are human beings, we cannot be free from birth, death, disease, and old age. The only option before us, there is no second way. The only option is stop being a human being. In other words, be divine. Recognize your divinity. When I recognize I am the divine being, I know there is no birth for me, no death for me, no disease, no illness, no old age, no aging. I am eternal, birthless, deathless, immortal, filled with bliss, and no changes occur in me, no transformation. But to have that awareness, I need to surrender my human identity. It's like if I want to see the rope, I have to give up the snake. I cannot say, oh, this snake is so beautiful, I'm so attached to this snake. I would like to see the rope. I really want to see the rope. But can I have both, please? The rope and the snake? I say, no, sorry. Just if you want to see the rope, the snake has to go. Exactly in the same way, most of us would be happy being immortal and birthless and deathless. Who wouldn't want to be this infinite being? The problem is not in wanting that. The problem is, in order to get that, I have to let go of my present identity. And that's the difficult part. I would like to have this as well as that, but the two cannot come together. And our problem is also that we are so accustomed to our present identity. We know it's not perfect. We know it's problematic, but at least it's something we know, rather than this something that we have no idea about. We just read about it in books. And therefore, the fear of the unknown prevents us from wanting it. He says that the binding identification, this bondage, is natural. By natural is meant that there is nothing miraculous about it. We know its cause. That why we are in ignorance, we know because our present identity has come because of past mental impressions. The reason we are born now is because of the past karmas that we did. So, and because we know why it happened, it's not unnatural. Natural really means we know the cause and effect relationship. It's also without beginning. Without beginning, it's not like really without beginning. Because if it were really without beginning, then it would never end. So by without beginning is meant we don't know when it began. So it just seems to have been there for a long time. And it's also said to be without end in the sense that unless I get knowledge, this ignorance will not end. So these two verses, 145 and 146, describe where is this ignorance rooted. And the answer is, it is rooted, where is this bondage rooted? And it is rooted in ignorance. And that's to be kept in mind, because as the next verse will point out, if the problem is ignorance, the solution can only be knowledge. There's no other way. If the problem is darkness, the only way we can remove darkness is by bringing light. There's nothing else you can do. And that's what is described in verse 147. This is an answer to the disciples' question, how is freedom attained? So verse 147. Nastrair na shastrair anilena vanhina chetum na shakyo na cha karma kotibhihi viveka vijnana mahasina vina dhatu prasadena shitena manjuna. It is not possible to destroy this bondage with missiles or with weapons or with wind or with fire or with millions of acts. It cannot be done without the amazingly mighty sword of discerning knowledge, which is sharpened through the purity of the senses. So this is what I was referring to, that if there is any material obstructions, then you can use missiles or weapons or wind or fire. But if it's just lack of knowledge, ignorance, then you need knowledge. So if there is like a real snake, then you will need a stick or you will need a gun to shoot it down. But if you are mistaking a rope for a snake, how do you get rid of that snake? A stick is useless. A gun is useless. that snake, which is mistakenly perceived, can be removed only through the knowledge of the rope. So if our bondage right now was a material bondage, then simply knowledge couldn't have removed it. But it is a bondage which is a product of ignorance, and therefore knowledge alone can remove it. It's a beautiful phrase here, the sword of discernment. It's actually the same phrase that Sri Ramakrishna used. You might remember that when this great teacher called Totapuri, the great Vedanta teacher, appeared at Dakshineshwar and was training Sri Ramakrishna in the Vedantic path, the path of non-dual experience, he asked Sri Ramakrishna, he said, withdraw your mind from everything in this world. All forms and names, they're just an appearance, they are not real. And so Sri Ramakrishna said that he had absolutely no difficulty, no problem withdrawing his mind from all the material forms and names. He had intense detachment, so that was not difficult at all. But there's one difficulty. He was so much attached to the form of the Divine Mother. So he said, that blissful form of the Mother, I just could not get rid of it. All other forms went away, but that one form. And that was the only hurdle for him to go to that formless realm. It is a form of the Mother, but it was still a form. It is still a limitation. And then Sri Ramakrishna says, with great difficulty, he said he imagined discernment, Viveka, as a big sword. And using that sword of discernment, mentally, he sliced that form. And then he says, then his mind soared into this infinite reality. So it's exactly the same phrase that was used there, the sword of discerning knowledge. Verse 148. Shruti pramanika mate swadharma nishtha tayaivatma vishuddhirasya vishuddha buddhe paramatma vedanam tenaiva samsara samula nashaha. A single-minded dedication to the Vedas leads to commitment to one's duties, which in turn leads to purification of the mind. One whose mind is pure experiences the Supreme Self, which in turn destroys samsara along with its roots. It's a beautiful chronological summary of spiritual life. So we begin with a single-minded dedication to the wisdom we find in the scriptures. All of these terms are important. Dedication we need, but that dedication also to be single-minded. That we'll often find when we begin our spiritual journey, yes, we are aware of so many different paths, so many different ways of reaching that divine. And all of those ways, all of those paths are good, effective. But eventually, we know that it's like when you are driving to some place. There are often not just one way of reaching that place. There could be 2 or 3 or 4 different options, 4 different routes you can take to reach that place. And at some point, you have to choose one of those 3 or 4. You can't say, I'm going a little bit on this, and a little bit on that, and a little bit on, just doesn't work that way. So even though there will be many options available, eventually we will find in our spiritual life, we will have dedication, and it will be a single-minded dedication to the path that we have chosen. Sri Ramakrishna gave a similar example by saying that if you want water and you are digging a well, then you have to keep digging at the same place. You can't dig for a few feet and say, oh, I don't think there's any water here. So let me try, and I can dig in 10 different places. I'll have just 10 different holes and no water. But if I had dug in the same place with single-minded dedication, I would have gone deeper and found water. So a single-minded dedication to the scriptures. Now here they said Vedas, what really means any wisdom, source of authentic wisdom, it leads to commitment to one's duties. Then we know what are the things we must do. The things we must do become our duties. But that commitment, those duties can also be binding if I just do the work as most people in the work seem to do. They get caught up. The work, instead of being a source of freedom, becomes a source of bondage. The work, instead of making them free, binds them even more. So when it says commitment to one's duties, what is meant is if I do my duties in the spirit of karma yoga, then that same work can free me. The same work can purify my heart. That is what earlier in this book, Shankara says, Chittasya shuddhaye karma, natu vastupalabdhaye. Doing good karma cannot give me enlightenment. Doing good karma can give me good results. It can give me some success. It can give me some happiness, which is true. A good work will lead to favorable result. But again, we are then caught up in this chain of karma and its effect. But if I do the same work in a selfless way, without getting attached to that result, then chittasya shuddhayeka. Chitta means a heart. So a work done selflessly, a work done as a yoga, will purify my heart. So if I simply do work, it will give me these results. But if I do the same work in the spirit of yoga, then it purifies my heart. That is what is referring to here. Commitment to one's duties leads to purification of the mind. One whose mind is pure experiences the self. See how sometimes you'll find that teachings that come in different scriptures get expressed in different ways, but how they kind of seem to come and merge into one. We read, for instance, blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. So purity of the heart is seen as an essential ingredient, essential requirement for the perception of the highest truth. So that purification of the mind, when the mind is pure, it experiences the supreme self, which in turn destroys samsara along with its roots. This along with its roots is very important. It's not enough to just go and cut a tree because it will sprout once again. If I want to just remove it once and for all, then I must remove it along with its roots. So it's not enough to simply eliminate some of the negativities of the heart. They are good. We have to eliminate them. But ultimately, we have to eliminate the source from which all these negativities come. And that is the ignorance itself. So destroys samsara along with its roots. So these two verses, 147, 148, answer the question, how is freedom attained? So this verse is beautiful, 148. Just these 4 lines, it just gives a very succinct summary of how it happened. There has to be this single-minded dedication to a source of wisdom, which will lead me to doing my duties in the spirit of yoga, which in turn will purify my heart. When my heart is pure, I'll have the vision of God. And that vision, that highest experience, will eliminate this samsara with its roots and remove all suffering from me forever. So we will stop here today. So if you have any thoughts, ideas, comments, questions, feel free to ask.
Hello, Swamiji. Swamiji, without knowing the quality of God, which may be higher than joy, that we will achieve upon realizing God, how do we motivate ourselves to seek God?
Without, what are the first parts?
So without knowing what is that nature of God, without knowing what is greater than the joy that we are now facing, how do we motivate ourselves?
If we don't know it, then of course we won't seek for it. But that's why the scriptures are here. So again and again, in books like this that we are studying, but also in the Gita, the Upanishads and other texts, they will describe the nature of the Atman, the nature of God, of what it will lead to, what kind of experiences we will have. So from scriptures and from other sources such as one's teacher or other authentic sources, we know what can happen. We also know it from looking at the lives of enlightened beings, of what they experienced. So just as there is this existential sorrow connected with being attached to this material body and mind, there is an existential joy connected with being the Atman. So just as suffering is inseparable from the body and mind, bliss is inseparable from the Atman. And so the mistake that oftentimes we tend to make is we try to somehow hope that one way or the other I'll be able to make my body and mind happy all the time. And it's a losing battle. No one ever in the past has been able to make the body and mind happy, blissful all the time. It doesn't work. Money cannot do it, fame cannot do it, prestige cannot do it, honor cannot do it, nothing can do it. Similarly, no one has tried to make the Atman miserable. It won't succeed. No one has tried that as far as you know. So that's ingredient, that's inseparable from these things. So instead of trying to make the body and mind happy all the time, what we can do is just recognize they are not me and look deeply and find I am the Atman. And once I know that, I find I'm already happy. I'm already blissful. That in order to get rid of suffering, in order to be happy, I don't need to really do anything. I just need to know who I am. And that's what we said in the beginning. It's not a question about doing. It's a question of being. Because the problem is ignorance. So the solution can only be knowledge. And knowledge simply means being ourselves. That's the idea. Yeah.
Swamiji, time to time, the question arises that if my true nature is rope, I am the rope, where this snake began? How do I become a snake?
Yeah, good. That's true. And the answer is we don't know. And we don't know is an expression of ignorance. We don't know how it happened. Yeah, it's a little bit like, it's like I was just lying in my bed. And then suddenly I found I'm in Hawaii. How did it happen? I don't know. Well, I mean, what we can say is that observe it well. I just fell asleep and was dreaming. But we don't even know the moment when we went to sleep. We don't know the moment the dream starts. When the dream starts, we find we are already in Hawaii. So yeah, so that's, I know it's not a very satisfactory answer, but that's because ultimately it's not satisfactory because the question is not, the question makes wrong assumptions. Because when I ask from where did this bondage come, I'm already assuming that the bondage has come. Now, if the bondage has not come, then how we can give an answer to that one? And that's why the answer always tends to be a little bit kind of just seems very evasive. It's almost like think about it this way. Suppose someone is hallucinating, maybe by drugs or by whatever, is started seeing things, and maybe some person is just seeing snakes everywhere, hundreds of snakes. Now, that person is hallucinating, but others are not, and this person is like, there are snakes, what am I going to do? And then now, if some other person goes and tells him, hey, there are no snakes, there is no snake, that answer is never going to be satisfactory because the person is actually seeing the snake. So telling a person who is seeing snakes that there are no snakes, not going to work. So the next thing we can say is, oh yeah, there are snakes here. Now, the best thing now for the snakes is you sit here and then kind of you give him some tranquilizer or something to kind of have that effect of hallucination go away in some way. And then afterwards, this person will say, oh, the snakes have gone. Thank God, there were so many snakes. And then you just say, yeah, you're really very fortunate the snakes have gone. But what else can you do? There were no snakes to begin with. So this is a little bit like that. All of us are experiencing the world. And then these books come and say, there is no world. There is just this one infinite being. And then we say, but how did it come? And now if someone said, well, it never came, it's not going to make sense. And so then they say, it's because of ignorance. And ignorance, and then attachment came, and this happened, and then all this karma came, and this. So the kind of a story is built up. And the story is built up because this narrative then gives us something to hold on to by saying what I should do to kind of reverse the curse, if you like, kind of go back and remove it. And once you remove it, you realize it was never there in the first place. So all of the trouble we take to remove it and to finally discover that it was never there. That's the reality. Yeah. Yes. Yes.
Maharaj, it says that in this book that when somebody has pure mind, it arrives at Brahman and the ultimate gain, jnana, and you reach at a status when the whole samsara is destroyed with the roots. And to get that pure mind, you are saying that selfless karma is one of the paths.
Yes, selfless karma purifies the heart.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, so somebody who continues doing the selfless karma, totally detaching itself with or any desire from there, selfless and no desire, then that's the one path to go.
So yeah, sit down. So what it means is that if my heart is purified, And in that purified heart, if I read this again, if my teacher comes and tells me, Tattvamasi, you are that, what that teaching will do to me, what effect it will have on me, will depend on the extent of the purity of my heart. If my heart is not pure at all, and I might hear, oh, you are that infinite being, then say, who knows, these are all stories, I might just say. But if my heart is pure, at least kind of a degree of purity has been attained, then I'm saying, oh, but it doesn't make sense, but let me think about it. So the more pure my heart gets as a result of selfless activity, what I get out of that simple teaching, you are that infinite being, will be very different. And when my heart has become completely pure, and I once again go and read this passage and says, you are that infinite being, and immediately I know, Aham Brahmasmi, I am that infinite being. I'm already enlightened. So that's the difference, that the teaching doesn't change, but my understanding of that teaching will change, depend on how much purity of heart I have acquired. Yeah. Anything else? Yeah.
Swamiji, there's a question. Once the heart is purified, how can it remain so and not get impure again? Or is it an irreversible process?
If the heart is completely pure and one gets knowledge, then it won't get impure again. Yes, it's an irreversible process. So it's like this. Once you get knowledge, you cannot become ignorant again. It's like if I have mistaken a rope for a snake, and once I know it is a rope, I won't be able to see a snake again. Even if I see a snake, I'll say, oh yeah, that's not real. The rope is real. So that's how we have all these enlightened ones. It's not that they don't see the world, because otherwise they won't be able to function in the world. An enlightened one doesn't go and bump against the wall or something. They know where the door is. So they are seeing the world, and the rest of us are seeing the world also. Then what is the difference? The difference is this. We see the world as real. An enlightened being also sees the world, but as unreal, as an appearance. So living, moving, and functioning in the world is not an obstacle. It's not a hurdle. Everyone does it. Enlightened beings live, and unenlightened beings also live in the world. The only difference is whether what I see and what I do, is this ultimately real or it's an appearance. So it's a difference between if you're sitting with little children to watch a movie, and children sometimes can get so absorbed in the movie, and sometimes you will see if it's a horror movie, and children will just say, oh, I just want to close my eyes, because everything is very real, and they are afraid. But no matter how terrible a movie may be, as long as we know it's a movie, you can sit and watch and enjoy. So that's how an enlightened being sees the world. That's the idea. Yeah. Anything else? Okay, so we will stop here today. So when we meet next time, we begin a new section. So just as the section up to this point studied the three bodies, the gross body, the subtle body, and the causal body, and showed how the Atman is different from them, the next section that we will study beginning next week will take up a similar quest, but in terms of the 5 layers. So the idea is same, that the Atman is covered by layers. You can see those layers either in terms of the 3 bodies, or you can see those layers in terms of the 5, what are called the koshas, the 5 layers. So we will begin that study when we meet next Wednesday. Om Jananim Saradam Devim Ramakrishnam Jagadgurum Padapadme Tayo Shritva Pranamami Muhurmuhu. On Sunday, we have a guest speaker, Professor Francis Clooney of the Harvard University, will speak on Ramakrishna and me. So I would encourage all of you to attend. Next Wednesday, we will continue with this study, and on Saturday, we'll have meditation as usual at 6. We'll conclude with a prayer now. May the Divine Being, who is the Father in heaven of the Christians, Holy One of the Jewish faith, Allah of the Muslims, Buddha of the Buddhists, Tao of the Taoists, Ahura Mazda of the Zoroastrians, the Great Spirit of the Native Americans, and Brahman of the Hindus, lead us from the unreal to the real, from darkness to light, from death to immortality. May we be granted strength, freedom, and clear understanding. May we learn to see God in our own hearts and in everyone around us. May God bless us all and fill our hearts with gratitude, grace, and love. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Peace, peace, peace be unto all.